All right, so we're going to get started. We have a wonderful session for you today. And again, good afternoon and welcome to the October session in our Community Racial Justice Series entitled Achieving Racial Equity in Education Through a Restorative Lens. This is sponsored by Stamford Cradle to Career and Stamford Stands Against Racism. And this webinar is brought to you and made possible with support from the Community Health Center. And so now we have a brief welcome from Dr. Tatiana Arma of CHC.
Good afternoon and welcome again. We're so excited, the Community Health Center, to be a part of this. We've been excited about the entire series of really important conversations, really looking to stamp out racism in our community. But we're especially excited about being a part of and just helping with the planning of this really important series. And I know that we're just here for this session today, but we know that this is going to be a robust conversation that will continue on with hopefully many other sessions on achieving racial equity in education through the restorative lens, as we are at over 150 school-based health centers throughout the state. This is such an important conversation, and so we're just really excited, and we wanted to extend an additional welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Arma. Well, as we're said, we are here to talk about achieving racial equity in education through a restorative lens. And I am Yolande Ford. I am the Director of Equity Initiatives at Stamford Cradle to Career. And today we have a few rock stars who will be peppered throughout our session today. Then you will be glad that you see and hear them. But we also have our panelists today. We have Olympia Della Flora, who is the Associate Superintendent for School Development here in Stamford. We also have Charmaine Davis, who is the principal at Dolan Middle School. We have Matt Laskowski, who is principal at Rippewam Middle School. And so we're going to be talking today about how to achieve equity in education. And what we want to really focus on is that equity is not equality. And so everything is different where it seems in order for our students to really get what they need in education. And so for so long, we have seen that there has been a struggle, especially for those students who are Black and brown. And now we really need to focus on how can we do better by those who have for so long been forgotten. And so we have our three panelists who will be discussing what we're going to, or what they have been doing over the past few years and see the results that they have. So I'm going to let let Ms. Della Flora come through and let her tell her story. Also, if you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat, but in the Q&A section so that we can get to them, okay? Don't forget to share this on your Facebook page. It's streaming on the Stamford Stands Against Racism page. Ms. Della Flora?
Thank you so much, Yolande. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be back in this venue with you again today and super excited to be here with two of my colleagues, Matt and Charmaine, who are just rock star principals. And I think that you will benefit today from hearing about their journey. And so before I get started, I just want to let you know that we're really going to have an informal conversation with you today about what racial equity through a restorative lens actually means to us. And again, you know, it's really our goal to just kind of give you some background and some data, and then just our own experiences in this journey. So I'm going to just share some overall information about things that are happening statewide and some things that are happening in Stamford, just to kind of lay the groundwork for the importance of this work and why we feel it's important for us in Stamford to start utilizing some new strategies. And then Matt and Charmaine are going to share what they're doing in their schools and in this restorative approach. And we also have some of our colleagues and staff members that are not able to actually join, but we actually had them record some video testimonials. So throughout the presentation, you will hear that. And again, we want to encourage you to use the chat. Hopefully at the end of the presentation, we will have some time for some Q&A, but it is our hope that you may learn something from our journey and that you will be able to take this back to your organization and your community. So I just think it's important when we have these talks about racial equity and educational equity that we recognize that this is not a new issue. And anyone who does any type of research or Google search, you will go back years and years to see that there were disparities that existed for students of color even before the pandemic. But as we all know, and as we all have heard, the pandemic just kind of blew a lot of this stuff back up to the surface. Lack of resources, lack of educational opportunities and outcomes. And the Office of Civil Rights does a data collection every few years. And I just picked, there are a number of, they just had a report that they released about the impact of COVID on various groups and even into higher education students. And this was just one quote that I pulled from that report, that it confirms that racially disproportionate disciplinary exclusions persist and have insidious consequences for academic opportunities. And this stat was that they stated was with Black students are 4 times more likely to be suspended from school than their white peers and more than twice as likely to be referred to law enforcement or arrest. So when those types of gaps exist, we have an obligation to address them and attempt to do something to close those gaps. The other thing I really liked about this was they tied, which you don't often see, the exclusionary disciplinary practices with your actual academic opportunity. Every time a student is excluded from their classroom, they're also excluded from their educational opportunities, which often can further disconnect and disengage our students. So moving forward, I pulled a few reports from state data. This is actually some suspension rates by race and ethnicity across the years in Connecticut. And again, you can get all of this information in these charts on the Connecticut State Department of Ed website. There's also a public website called EdSite. But the good news is that we are trending down in Connecticut with our suspension rate. And I will say, when the state calculates their suspension rate, they usually look at a student who has at least one incident. So sometimes we have obviously students who have multiple. So if you look at this data, this is actually trend data from 2015 school year up until the 1920. And remember, during the 1920 school year, that was the year that we really shut down in March. So we're really not looking at a full year. But you can see American Indian Alaskan Natives is in the first chart. Their suspension rate in 1920 was a 6.6, Asian 1.1, and this is state data. Black or African Americans 10.3%, Hispanic students 6.9, Native, Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islanders 5.3, 2 or more races 4.9, and white 2.9. So you can see those numbers are across the board and obviously not equitable across our student population. So this is just one example of how students of color are disproportionately suspended. Another data point I would like to share today is also some trend data across the state of Connecticut. These are students that are suspended in pre-K to 2. Now there is a state law that it has to be a serious offense now if you're suspended at these at this young age. But again, there is hopeful information because our numbers are trending down. For example, if you look at the Black or African American line, in 2014, 2015, there were 907 students in K2 that were suspended or expelled, and up until 1920, we're down to 228. So that shows us that some of the strategies that we are implementing in the state are helping to us reduce those numbers, but we still have a long way to go when you look at the gaps between the different racial groups. Now, I pulled some data from Stanford, and the way that I utilized this data was actually looking at the total number of suspensions. So some of these suspensions could have been the same kid. So if you look at our population, our Black students represent 15%, this is in 1920 school year, represented 15% of our entire student body. But when I look at the total number of suspensions, they represented 39% of those suspensions. So almost 3 times what our percentage, because you want your percentage of suspensions, well, we want no suspensions, but it should be lined up with your overall student population. And I think our principals are going to speak to that at their school level in just a little bit. When we look at our Hispanic percentage, total population was 40%, and the percentage of our suspensions that were with Hispanic students was 47%. So it's a little closer to the actual overall percentage. When we look at our white students, 33% of our student population in Stamford was considered white, and their percentage of the suspensions was only 13. So almost 3 times less likely to be suspended if you are white. And our Asian population was 8% of students and 1% of our total suspension. So again, when we look at data, we start to see these disparities, and we want to dig a little bit deeper to figure out how we can make those more equitable. And that brings us to our first testimony. So I'm going to go ahead and play our first video.
Achieve racial equity in my classroom, I make every effort to use restorative practices. Some come naturally and some I have to work at, and that's okay. It's worth the time, it's worth the energy, because of the results are pretty amazing. So what does using restorative practices mean? Well, it means that my students have a very predictable environment. There's a sense of calm in my classroom, a sense of respect. I greet each student by name. I use eye contact. And in here we acknowledge when we have done something wrong without any judgment. And then we repair when we have harmed somebody. My mindful moments time has been one of the most powerful times in my journey to restorative, because this is where all the trust has been built. It's pretty amazing. All the magic kind of happens here. So students walk in each day to a soothing video clip or an activity, and the lights are muted. There's a chance to catch their breaths. They know this, they expect it, they actually love it. So this time of quiet, this time of reflection, this time of just kind of being present has morphed into, after a few minutes pass, students talking to me, raising issues with me. It builds trust and community. They talk, I listen. Well, Charmaine Davis now had a book club, and it was, one of the books was Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. Listening is the first component in building rapport. So you don't have to do a whole lot of talking, just kind of let the kids unload, let them know that you're a safe space. They will build trust. This trust relaxes the brain. Once the brain is relaxed, they can learn better, they can accept things that aren't ideal better, and they can realize how valued they are. Achieve racial equity.
So one of the things that the teacher shares with us that we did talk about, we wanted to press upon, is that when we talk about restorative practices, we're not always talking about restorative circles, which is what a lot of people think about, because the restorative circles happens usually after a harm has been done. But what she really paints the picture for us is that the restorative work really starts at the beginning of the day, right? And it starts with that building of relationships and making students feel safe. If students feel safe and cared for, they're more likely to engage at school and less likely to have some of the behaviors that are actually going to possibly get them excluded from school. Now, I also want to bring your attention to a couple of slides that I also pulled around Stamford data, because again, we also want to show that the importance of this work is not just about kids being excluded from school and having a restorative lens of trying to close those gaps, but there can be direct correlation into those academic opportunities. And so what you're looking at here is the SBAC test, which is the state test that we give in Connecticut in, I believe, grades 4 through 8. And so what I've done is pulled a snapshot of the ELA, or English Language Arts growth rate, over trend data we have up until 2019. And what you'll see, I mean, you may have to zoom in, but each student has a growth rate that they're expected to reach. When they come in, they're at a certain level. By the end of the year, they should be, or every year, they should grow by a certain percentage. And if you look at this chart, you'll see that our Asian students are growing at the highest rate. They're that maroon line, and followed by our white students, which is that light blue line. And then the two or more races is the light green line. So you can see that trend data. And then our two lowest performing with reaching their growth rate are our Black and African American students and our Hispanic students, which are represented by the dark green and the brown line. And the data is pretty much the same when you look at the math growth rate. And so here you see again, our Asian students are meeting their growth targets at the highest percentage, followed by our white students. And then our green line there in the middle is represented by two or more races. And then our lowest percentage of students that are meeting their growth targets are, again, our Black and African American students and our Hispanic Latino students. So we're looking at discipline data, and we're also looking at academic data, and we're seeing a common trend of gaps in both places. And so one of the things that we have started to do, and what you'll understand as you are on this restorative journey, is that it is important for us to use a common language. So I think as we're having this discussion, we thought it was important to define two definitions before we get started with sharing some of the stories. And the first is race equity. And so race equity is the condition where one's race identity has no influence on how you fare in society. And what we really want to do is that last bullet, include the elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce differential outcomes by race. So by looking at our academic and our discipline data, we know that there are differential outcomes right now that exist by race. And so what we're trying to do is combat that and to make that not a reality. And the second definition we thought that is important as a common language is educational equity, which we believe is tied to race equity, raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and high performing students. So ideally, what we would like to see is that chart that I showed you with the Asian students and the white students at the top. We would like to make those so that all students are raising their achievement and meeting their growth targets, and that we don't have those gaps that we currently see. And then we want to eliminate racial or cultural predictability and disproportionality amongst those student groups that occupy the highest and lowest achievement. So we will, you will hear throughout the presentation again today that it is important to have a common language. All right, so we're gonna just start because we know we have a wide variety of our audiences in our audience today. Just a quick clip about what our restorative practice is, and then we're gonna get into letting you hear some of the things that are happening within our schools here in Stamford.
So I've got my essay written, and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm gonna show you how I use Grammarly to edit. Okay, so
let's try this one.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe. diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend.
Alrighty. And we have one more testimony, and then we're going to turn it over to our principals.
Hello, my name is Matt Roberto, and I'm a school counselor at Ripon Middle School. I've been here for 11 years. For 11 years, I've been looking into different disciplinary situations where students have made a mistake or broken a rule or harmed another student in the community. And for most of the time while I was here before restorative work, we simply found out who was responsible, applied some level of punishment, and moved forward. And that seemed fine at the time, but ultimately it was just injuring the relationship between the school, the community, the students, and the staff and faculty. So with restorative practices, we now have a much better option for a narrative to figure out what's going wrong or what has happened in the situation, some of the reasons, factors as to why, resolve those situations, put solutions that can be maintained over a long amount of time in place, and continue to have a conversation about what led to previous incidents and how to diffuse other situations before they happen. I think in the end, the students feel more heard, the families feel more connected to the school, and the school feels more like it's doing the exact job of a school should be doing, which is educating, as opposed to a punitive response. So restorative practices have been effective here, and we look to grow the program. Thank you. Bye. Hello, my name.
And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our principal from Dolan Middle School, Charmaine Davis, and she's going to share some of the work that they're doing at Dolan around racial equity through a restorative lens. Charmaine?
Thank you, Olympia, and I appreciate all of the data that has been shared because it really helps provide a foundation from the national to the state and down to our district level. I'm excited to share a little bit about, and I say a little bit because this has been quite a journey of learning and exploration and trial and error, much to the point that our teacher here at Dolan shared about trying restorative practices and learning as we go. But I'm here today just to share a bit about the path that we have been on and continue to grow from, and that we're still traveling. Restorative practices has such a positive impact on overall climate in a school, in any community for that matter. I chose to kind of lean on some weather analogies considering such. And looking out the window today, I think we're on the right path. So please humor me as I walk through the journey here at Dolan. So just to give you a snapshot of the students that we service here at Dolan, Dolan has a student population made up of about 67% students of color and between 50 and 60% students who would qualify for free and reduced lunch. Those are pre-COVID numbers, of course, as we don't, we're not currently establishing that officially in the current delivery of school. So we really were experiencing what one might call the perfect storm a few years ago. We had lots of staff frustration over negative behaviors from our students, and really an overall feeling that there was a lack of academic focus. We also realized that our students were feeling that they were disconnected and feeling like they didn't have a valued voice in our school community. And overall, that really led to survey data and outcomes that were unfavorable. And we knew that we had work to do to restore our climate here at Dolan. So to kind of give you a little bit of a walk through the training journey, which again, we're still on, and how we came to really embrace the restorative practices approach and the lens that we live through and teach through and learn through every day. We started with a 3-day school climate training. I was invited to be a part of that with a wonderful 2 towns model between Stamford and Norwalk. And then there were extended opportunities that were popping up. And as many of you may be aware, restorative practices has really been sweeping the nation throughout schools, public, private, and otherwise, because we've seen proven results. For us at Dolan, it really was an issue of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. We were looking for better ways, more meaningful ways to address our school climate challenges, and we really latched on to the restorative practices model. We were able to benefit and continue to benefit from a working partnership with Cradle to Career. And out of that, I am so happy to continue to celebrate the collaboration that was developed with my colleague, who you'll hear from shortly. And we really, Mr. Laskowski, the principal of Ripwam, and I built a side-by-side model and piloted collaborative training for about 1.5 years, going deeper with both of our staffs simultaneously, learning more about restorative practices and how they could impact our school communities. So as I noted, that really was our shift in climate, and we continue to experience that shift. We still have a lot of work to do, but I can tell you what I would term after the storm. We have committed to 100% of our staff undergoing restorative practices training. We've really experienced a major shift in how administratively we manage student behavior outcomes when there are incidences that need to be reviewed. We are carving out and creating opportunities for student voice to be heard more loudly and more clearly, which we have seen a real shift in making space. And I think this is such a work in progress, but we have learned that you have to state it, and it needs to be very intentional when we are all working to empower not only our staffs, but our students. Our ongoing goal, and as I mentioned, we're still on the path and we are learning the power of circling up. Ms. Delaflora mentioned that restorative circles are only one very effective, but only one part of the restorative practices lens and looking through that. But our goal is to circle up when we need to address not only problems, but also from the front end. This is a wonderful approach on relationship building, on giving a platform for our students to share, for our staff to come up with solutions. And our goal is to continually extend this throughout our school community. Another goal is to really work towards making the restorative lens, how we approach our daily school life across Dolan Middle School's experiences, that it is just the way that we do business here at Dolan. So moving forward, and I would say our future forecast is ongoing. We have begun the work of this year. We are pushing forward for phase 2 of our student handbook being rewritten, just paying closer attention to the language. It's amazing how, and I'm thinking back to the testimonial from the school counselor at Rippewam, who noted going through years and years of practices that we just know were not as effective, but not always having a better way or knowing a better way. Now that we have been exposed to more effective approaches, not only for our students, but also for our staff members, we are making it our business to really go deeper into the way we deliver policies and expectations. And so that's a big goal for us. We are also pushing to create a student leadership body who can help deliver restorative practices, support, and training to all of our Dolan Raiders, our students here in the school. We initially started that process just as we were shutting down back in 2020, but that is our goal, to pick that up again and make sure this year that we have our student leaders trained so they will not only benefit from restorative circles and all of the approaches that come with this work, but they can also help lead this work, and that will further intensify the student voice present here at Dolan. And finally, we are working hard to include our parents not only as benefactors of the restorative practices lens that we're all working to look through and work through, but to train and expose our parents to the tenets of restorative practices so that we can all achieve greater equity across the board, and that the parent voice and levels of participation will be greater valued. So we have another testimonial, and looking forward to hearing from yet another teacher.
My name is Jennifer Ibarra, and I want to take a minute to talk about equality, equity, and restorative practices. So what's really, really interesting and important now that we've had some training in restorative practices and we continue to train in restorative practices is that it does let me as a teacher provide more equitable solutions to students. And so what that means for me is when something is equal, it's the same. But if something's equitable, then people are getting what they need. And using restorative practices really helps me give my students what they need and really helps me meet their needs on an emotional level, on an academic level, just on a happy environment. I like coming to school level because it really takes away a lot of the negativity and what we would think of as discipline. But discipline in the past that wasn't beneficial because it was so negative. And with restorative practices, it just takes the negativity away. We can have a very open dialogue about what the student needs, what the teacher needs, what other kids in the class need, and how to make that happen.
So I want to tell the story in a little bit of a different way than just offering a narrative. So for me, I'm going to present our journey at Rippewam with some data and some numbers. And so right here, this graphic is showing you from 2018 up until this present moment, the number of out-of-school suspension incidents by year. I'm going to mute myself 1 second because there's an announcement coming. I apologize for that. And so my first year as principal here at Rippewam was actually in the 2017 to 2018 school year. And I started actually right around this time, it was in October. And because I did not kick off the year, I felt it was important for me to listen and follow a lot of the initiatives that were already started by the previous principal and previous administration. Going into my second year, which was the 2018-19 year, one of the most frequent pieces of feedback that I heard from staff was, we really need to crack down on discipline and supporting behaviors. So that year, we really did focus on addressing all the behaviors that were negative in the building, and it led to 176 incidents of out-of-school suspension, which was the highest that we'd had in several years, and the highest that we've had since that point. In reflecting on what we were doing, it became evident to me that it wasn't working. So staff didn't feel good, students didn't feel good. I certainly didn't. Parents didn't when I spoke to them. And so we really were searching for another approach to shifting how we see misbehaviors and how we deal with it. And so this line that you see in bold marks the separation between before restorative practices training and after. And so what I'm really proud of is that we were able to reduce the number of incidents every year since. Now, I have to acknowledge the fact that in March of 2020, we went into distance learning due to the COVID pandemic. But if you look at this number of 54, that was about 2/3 of the way through the year. If you add on the additional third, it would get us to 72. So well under 100 incidents less than we had the year before. Last year, we only had 12 incidents, and we had students in school full-time from March until June. And so that was a product of students coming to school every other day up until March, and then every day from March until June. And so you can see that that's even less than the 17 that would have been projected from the 1920 year. And now currently we are at 8 incidents. So again, I'm very proud that our numbers have gone down. However, for us to truly work on being equitable and push for more equitable outcomes, we need to go deeper into the data. So when we disaggregate it, you can see on the far right, the totals, and that's the total number of out-of-school incidents that we just looked at. But if you disaggregate it by racial subgroup, you can see that our Black students have been suspended out of school more frequently than our Hispanic, white, and Asian students. And so for us to achieve equity, we need to try to bring those numbers down closer to what our demographic numbers actually show. So this is our current makeup, and I chose our 4 largest represented subgroups. So almost half of our school is Hispanic, 48%. 21.7% of our school identifies as being white, 18.2% as Black, and 5% as Asian. And so this table right here, the far right shows you those percentages. So the far right where it says current percentage is what our students are actually made up of. When you look at the suspensions from 18-19 up until this year, you can see how we've started to shift the percentages for our subgroups that are disproportionately represented or suspended at a higher rate, try to bring that down. So in 18-19, our Black students were, you can see the rate was 47%, and 18% of our students identify as being Black. So that is much higher than the rate of our students who are actually at our school. When we look at currently this year, last year and this year, we are in the 30%. So not where we want to be, but we're certainly making progress towards where we want to get to. As far as our Hispanic population is concerned, it did reach a high point in 2021, but we're almost right where we want to be, 50% compared to 48% of our population identifying as being Hispanic. And right now, 21% of our students are white, and our suspension data shows 13% of our suspensions are white students. And so that's slightly lower than our current demographics are. And so we have worked with Ms. Davis and Dolan to train all of our staff to implement restorative practices in the classroom and at the whole school level. And I do want to say this because it's not just about applying these practices when an incident occurs. When we're able to build a positive community and students feel connected to their classrooms and their school, we found that they're less likely to engage in negative behaviors. And so it's not just about how we respond to the behaviors, it's about creating a school environment that students truly feel connected to. And this next testimony is from one of our para-educators, Barry Woods.
Hello, my name is Barry Woods, para-educator from Ripon Middle School. My reflection on restorative circles and the restorative process in this building and how things have been going. I think things have been going very well. I think it's a consistent challenge that we have to, continue to hammer at because we're trying to redevelop or trying to develop a new culture within the school here. I think the restorative practice processes and the circles allow the children to communicate with themselves in a very different way. It helps them understand each other in a different way, help them understand their actions, their behaviors, why certain things happen another way. Also allows the students to learn how to express themselves appropriately, whether when frustrated or feeling misunderstood of a situation. I do feel that we also need to make sure that we stay consistent with the restorative process with the adults in the building as well, so that things can marry. I think the adults are going to be a lot harder challenge to face than the students, but it's something that we look forward to, attacking here to create the proper community and the proper culture.
So that brings us to one of our closing slides, just to kind of recap what we wanted to leave this presentation with. And then we have one more testimonial from one of our staff members. But we really wanted to leave some thoughts with you, some ways, some things that you can take with you as you leave our presentation this afternoon. And the first thing is, we really want to emphasize, as Matt just shared with us, you really want to try to find ways to improve your overall culture and climate. How do you make that school? How do you make your community organization feel safe for students and a place that they want to be and they feel respected and cared for? Second of all, it's important to develop a shared mindset and a voice that's inclusive. Again, having those common language and those common definitions and starting those conversations early on in your journey and continuing to revisit those are very important. Also, all of your stakeholders need to feel that it's safe for them to share their voice. You also want to be proactive and strategic with purposeful planning and implementation. And you've heard from Charmaine and Matt, this journey did not happen overnight. They have been at this for years. And it does involve a lot of training, a lot of conversations with staff in order to get them to understand some of these practices and strategies that are used. It's also very, very important to have ongoing review of your data and to be able to look at those through multiple lenses. As we were planning for this presentation, we talked about many different ways that we could present and share data. And I think that you see that in the presentation, we shared it in different ways, but it's really important to drill down into that data and not just look at it surface if you really want to hone in on some of those gaps and really focus on ways that we can lessen those across different student groups. And last but not least, we want to talk about strengthening that community school home partnership that's going to continue to cultivate those positive relationships. And if we were to leave one word with you from this entire presentation, I think it would be that relationships are very important and relationships matter. The act of being restorative, the act of closing achievement gaps, the act of helping students get to reach their ultimate potential, especially in the academic realm, is really boils down to what those relationships are. And we, as the adults, have the ability to create those safe spaces in our schools and in our communities. And I also want to just challenge you to leave this graphic there that we like, because again, if you look at the picture and you're not really honing in on some of those details, you may just see a sea of flowers that all look the same. But it's really important to start to drill down in order to meet the needs of every student. And last but not least, we have one more testimonial, and then we will get to some Q&A, and Yolanda will take over.
Hi, I'd like to reflect on my experiences and being restorative at Rippewam. So I've noticed that the students are able to learn life skills, being able to verbalize their emotions and use positive strategies to deal with difficult situations instead of fighting or turning to social media in a negative way. I have noticed that the students have better relationships after the restorative circles or the intervention itself. And it's a life skill that they need to learn. And I'm very happy and proud to be part of it. Thank you. Hi.
All right, I'll get ready to turn it over to Yolanda, but I do want to say thank you to all of the participants for joining us today. Again, we have started this journey and we are on this journey and really working to expand this to more of our schools. And actually, Yolanda, if I could just address one question I did see in the chat. There was a question about, do all schools in Stamford have the data that was shared by Mr. Laskowski by school? Actually, yes, all of this is located on our state public website, which is EdSite. I also pulled the data that I shared around SBAC performance. You can break it down by race. You can break it down by student group. So as Yolanda takes over for Q&A, I will definitely put that in the chat, but you also could just Google EdSite SIGHT Connecticut, and you can pull it up by state, by district, and you can also drill down by school.
Thank you so much. The information that we have just heard has been very valuable. One of the words that has been a theme here is that this is a journey. And because this is a journey, that means that this is an ongoing process, meaning that there is not a means, this is not a means to an end. This is not about a program, but this is about building relationships with our kids. This is about building relationships even with our teachers, our principals, our paraeducators, our bus drivers. This is a community effort. And so this is not just part of what the school is doing. This is what the entire Stamford community is working towards. We're working towards becoming a more restorative community. And so when we start caring more about other people and their voices, then we are able to see more productivity in all areas of life. So we have a few questions. One of the questions that we do have is that it was asked, what would it take to ensure that all of the middle schools here in Stamford are doing this work?
I can jump in.
Okay.
And just give my little 2 cents. And I don't know if Charmaine or Matt want to join. Actually, Clunan and TOR, we actually have done this in a cohort model. So Dolan and Rippewam started, and then last year TOR and Clunan started, and so they will continue that. And so we really are just having to bring on Schofield next. And people say, you know, what does it take? It really just takes a commitment to make it a priority, right? So any of you can embark on this journey, and you can take it in as small or as big steps as you feel that you need to. Our strategy and our model is more to take it into smaller chunks and to build upon that. There's different models you can use with this. We cross-trained across 2 schools. So I think it adds to the conversation as you're going through professional development and you're exploring, because you start to see some of those commonalities across middle schools, and it's not only happening in one school, and teachers have the opportunity to talk to teachers who are not within their school. And also through some of the trainings that we've done through our partnership with Cradle to Career, we actually have been in the room with staff in Norwalk. And so that has also added to our conversation and our understanding, because we find out Norwalk is dealing with some of the same issues that we're dealing with in Stamford, and we can share those ideas and ways to implement. So again, as Yolande said, it's not necessarily a program, and you can make it based off of what your needs are, but that is our goal would be to have, you know, people have strategies and understanding in all of our schools. And that's why we're trying to move to being a more restorative school district. But again, you have to look at your organization, where you're at, and develop that plan and that journey. Even though Dolan and Rip participated in a lot of professional development together, their journeys still are different in what it actually plays out to look like in their schools.
All right. And that's one of the things that we are really pushing, that the school system is doing something, but we also here at Stamford Cradle to Career, we are offering trainings to the community as well, free of charge. We would love for you to come in and participate and see what these see what this is about, and see how you can really start implementing this in your everyday life. And so we do have a training that is coming up in January. Our January training is going to be January 27th and 28th, and it's our school climate training. We also have our restorative practices training that will be February 3rd and 4th. And we'll get that information out to you after this session. But we also will be having smaller trainings. We realize that this is a big commitment. 2 days, 10 hours, that's a big commitment. And so we also have smaller trainings that will be coming out in the spring that are smaller, that are like an hour and a half. We've had these before, and we've had wonderful attendance. We have had wonderful feedback from this, because the goal here is to make Stamford a restorative community, not just here in the schools, but we need what's going on in the schools to be reinforced in the home, and then to be reinforced in our with our community agencies, our after school programs, our before school programs, our churches, our synagogues, everywhere that we go. We're wanting this to be more widespread. We have another question. Let me look to see. Okay, so one of our questions is, hold on, let me pull it up. How are Stamford Public School teachers and staff being educated with this type of information so that they can be aware of the danger that they may be harsher in their scrutiny of their Black students, for instance? So biases. So can anyone speak to that about the biases being brought up in these trainings?
So I think there are trainings that occur parallel. And so when Dolan and Rip engaged in the school climate and restorative practices training, we also embarked on a book study, which one of Ms. Davis's teachers shared, and it's Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And so what Ms. Davis and I work to do is really create these parallel conversations and trainings so that we can naturally create a link between restorative practices and equitable practices. I think everybody has blind spots, and by the nature of a blind spot, we don't necessarily see them. So engaging in conversations and dialogue in a trusted environment, it allows us to be able to speak about things that we know or we feel or we've experienced. And the broader that community, or the broader the group that's talking, it allows for people to in a safe space sort of call one another out on things that it might be misinterpreted, or also sometimes we make comments or statements about things and we don't realize they are harmful. Our intention is one thing, but the impact is another. And so what we have tried to do is create these safe spaces where we can look at maybe it's something that happened in the school, and get together and have a conversation about it, and allow for an open floor, and everybody can share about, what their understanding of what happened is, how it impacted them, and how they feel like it maybe impacted their class or their whole school community. And then we also can talk about collectively, what do we need to do to make that particular circumstance better. And if we only have a narrow focus or a small number of people contributing their voices, then we may miss things, and those blind spots may continue to be blind. So for us, it's about allowing for more voice, and that's not just our staff voice. We've created a program for students that's called our Student Ambassadors Program, where we have students at each level who help us solve difficult problems at their grade level. And then we are working with those ambassadors to identify what we're calling our Board of Governors, and that would be representatives of all grade levels who will work on a coalition to solve whole school problems. And so I think the more voices that we bring into the conversation, we're able to identify biases that might be represented, and then work to provide education and more information so we can potentially alleviate those biases.
I'd also like to just jump in with some kind of broad brush strokes, and thank you, Matt, for kind of pulling those pieces together to give some examples of how things are working through a restorative lens in our schools. I think what shouldn't be lost today is the fact that all of what has been shared is a compilation of examples of overall school improvement, that the focus is to work to hear more voices, to establish more safe space, to also, quite frankly, start to ask the questions of why the disparities exist. And we have to really understand and have a level of appreciation and actually accept the very difficult data sometimes so that we can get there. But I think the point has been made several times today that all of what works when we have restorative environments is the fact that we have to front load with relationship building. And that takes real work. That takes some slowing down so we can speed up. That takes some, look, we don't have all the answers, but we're trying to get there. We're trying to make our schools better for our staffs, for our students, and for our families as a whole, because the impact, the long-term impact, is on Stamford and on broader communities and even, our country and our world. So I just think it's important. I go back again to the testimonial from the school counselor at RIP, noting we've tried several things over the years, and many approaches were not moving the needle. One thing that is unique to restorative practices is key questions are being asked, and the space is being made for all stakeholders to be heard. We noted this is a journey, and we noted that we are growing through this, but it impacts all stakeholders, and we need everyone to come to the table with a mindset, as Ms. Della Flora said, the like mindset of school improvement and doing away with the disparities once we can better understand why they exist.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know that this has taken some time out of your busy schedule, and I really appreciate Olympia and Charmaine and Matt for being here and giving their view on how they have implemented and are implementing restorative practices in their schools and in their circle of influence. So we thank all of our participants for being here with us. We do have a survey for you. We will put that in the chat. It has been put in the chat. And so if you can please fill that survey out before you leave, we'll also email it to you and some other information. Thank you so much for joining us and for your wonderful questions and your attention. And we look to see you next month. We have our next session, which is in November, and it will be on investing in racial equity. And we have Juanita James and David Adams, who will be our guest panelists. So we look forward to seeing you, and again, have a wonderful afternoon. Stay dry.